on KBLA Talk 1580.
Climate is king.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that caring for the community means caring about the climate. You might have heard that we announced a pretty bold 12-month, $2 million campaign to do 4 things. Increase climate literacy, turn up the volume on communities of color in the climate conversation, connect everyday people with the resources they need to survive and thrive, and highlight frontline climate justice crusaders of color throughout this year. KBLA Talk 1580 will be bringing you insightful interviews on all of our shows to help raise your climate IQ. Each quarter this year, we will also be hosting free climate events in various communities throughout the city with food, fun, and forward-thinking conversations. Thanks to partners like LADWP, Metro, Caltrans, the Sierra Club, the California Community Foundation, the California Endowment, AQMD, MWD, and more. You'll also be hearing more about a couple of national town halls broadcasting live from Los Angeles, to which you will be invited. And we'll be rolling out a robust social media campaign on all our platforms, as well as an outdoor media campaign, all designed to educate, enlighten, and empower you in our fight for climate justice.
We want cleaner air.
Caring about the community means caring about the climate. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that we really can change the world if we care enough. 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 If we care enough.
1, 2, 3, go! Ha ha! Let's get it going. I'm gonna try to keep it coming. Things ain't always smooth, but I'll be alright as long as I can find the groove. Yes, I will. Yeah. Somehow I know that I can make it. You seem to like my style. All right. Don't you worry, I'm gonna be around a while. Yes, I will. I'm just happy to see you talk to me back in style again.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavissmileyshow.com. That's thetavissmileyshow.com or wherever you get your podcast and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast version of this program at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, 2 conversations. Up first, the David and Goliath story of the Southern Company, which owns Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and Alabama Power versus Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. The Southern Company is accused of polluting poor neighborhoods, causing a mess of health challenges for black residents, and allegedly going so far as to pay a black newspaper to write nice things about the company. Reverend Michael Malcolm, Executive Director of the People's Justice Council, will tell us all about this particular climate justice fight on the top of Hour 2. On the B side of Hour 2,
It's a pride you feel that makes you walk the walk. Here comes Sunday morning, palms up in praise, yeah. It's all about my mama naming house raised. Get your state of mind no matter where you're from. Living like your grandma does. Cause good home training ain't a common thing. Now, if this is who you are, let me hear you say, oh, you don't have to be a Georgia peach from Savannah Beach to
we will celebrate the 4th season of African-American country music artist Reese Palmer's groundbreaking Apple Music radio show, Color Me Country Radio, which puts a spotlight on contributions of artists of color who've been long underrepresented in the genre of country music. I look forward to talking to Reese Palmer on the backside of hour 2. In our 3rd hour today.
Dr. King, how do you respond to Senator Thurman threatening to filibuster the Civil Rights Bill?
Well, I'm here today during this critical debate to convince his fellow senators to do otherwise. But I assure you, we will not be content even after this bill is passed. The failure to pass the bill would thrust our nation into a dim horizon of social turmoil.
Are you suggesting there might be violence if the bill is defeated?
Realism impels me to admit that if the bill is not passed, it'll be harder to keep the struggle disciplined.
Reverend,
Minister,
I've been hoping for this day for a long time. We meet at last.
it seems like we've attracted quite a bit of attention. What makes me think you may have invited them?
No, I'm sure they must be here for you, Doctor. One thing's for certain, you're now going to be investigated.
Well, I have it on good authority. My file is already much larger than yours.
Who do you think this is going to hurt more, you or me?
I imagine it's unlikely to hate either one of us.
Well, then let's keep them guessing.
Amen to that.
All praise to Allah. We should do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Jeff Stetson joins us in hour 3 to talk about his new Nat Geo series, Genius, MLK-X, inspired by his 1987 play, The Meeting, a fictional encounter between Martin and Malcolm back in 1965. Powerful series now on Nat Geo called Genius, MLK-X. Jeff Stetson joins us to talk about that today in our 3rd hour. But in this 1st hour today, this Thursday, the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments on whether Donald Trump can be removed from state ballots this November. It's shaping up to be the biggest election case since Bush v. Gore. So who better to talk to than Jeffrey Toobin, the man who wrote the seminal book about Bush v. Gore, Too Close to Call. Knowing Jeffrey as I do, I suspect there will also be a book about this drama, too, when it's all over. Jeffrey Toobin, good to have you back on the program. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, Tavis. Hi.
It's good to have you.
A lot of legal news. You got a lot of legal news today. I don't know if you saw what happened in the D.C. Circuit today. Okay, we got plenty to talk about.
Did I see? I've got about 60 seconds here. I'll let you top line. I was going to start there. We'll talk about Thursday, but let's talk about Tuesday. There is major breaking news. I got 60 seconds. You know how to do this. Tee it up, Jeffrey. We'll continue when we come forward. What just happened today?
The D.C. Circuit, the Intermediate Appeals Court, said that Donald Trump can be prosecuted for crimes he committed while he was president. The short answer is no one is above the law.
So Trump has no immunity from prosecution for January 6th.
That means the January 6th case, the case in federal court that accuses him of using fake electors to try to win the 2020 election, that case can proceed. However, that decision from today will certainly be appealed to the Supreme Court, and obviously we'll see if they take the case and what happens there.
There's a lot to talk about. Donald Trump, we now know, according to this federal appeals court, has no immunity from January 6th prosecution, and that's just today, Tuesday. On Thursday, as I mentioned, we will see what the arguments are in this case about whether or not he can be kicked off of ballots in certain states. A lot of news, and Jeffrey Toobin is the right guy to have on today. How lucky am I? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
Can you dig it? Come on! What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
It's never been faster or easier to be a voter. Look for your vote by mail ballot in the mail. Fill it in and drop it off at a mailbox on your way to work, on your daily walk, or when dropping the kids off at school. Save time and vote early. Make a plan to vote at plan.lavote.gov. That's plan.lavote.gov. Brought to you by the Los Angeles County Registrar.
Don't settle for bumps, ingrowns, and itch due to dry skin. Try Venus for pubic hair and skin, the razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area. Featuring a razor with patent irritation defense bar and skin care regimen that is dermatologist and gynecologist tested. Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Discover the full regimen of products at GilletteVenus.com.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the exclusive media sponsor of this light of ours, activist photographers of the Civil Rights Movement. A dynamic new exhibition on view now at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. This light of ours showcases more than 150 photos taken by movement insiders from diverse backgrounds that reveal the vital work undertaken by a broad coalition of organizers and everyday people whose collective action changed America. This light of ours is one of 3 temporary exhibitions currently on view at the Skirball, which together explore issues related to civil rights, immigration, and pluralism. Tickets and more information for all 3 exhibitions are available at skirball.org. That's skirball.org. SKIRBALL.org.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
More of Tavis Smiley and Jeffrey Toobin coming your way right now for the rest of this hour. So, Jeffrey, this is breaking news. I guess the first question I have for you is whether or not you, as a legal scholar, are surprised by this ruling.
Not at all. I mean, unlike the case that we're going to talk about on Thursday, this one strikes me as really an easy one, and I would have been shocked if it came out another way. Sometimes when a judge asks a question in oral argument, it crystallizes an issue so well that you just know how the issue is going to come out. And in the argument of this case, one of the judges, Florence Pan, asked Trump's lawyer and said, "Do you mean to tell me that if Donald Trump as president used SEAL Team 6 from the Navy to assassinate one of his political opponents, he couldn't be prosecuted for a crime?" And the lawyer sort of bumbled around, but I mean, it is so obvious that we can't give presidents absolute immunity for anything they might do as president. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that Trump will be convicted when this case ultimately comes to trial, but the idea that just by being president, you are literally above the law and can't be prosecuted is, I think, a really offensive idea to, our system. And so I was not surprised that this case came out the way it did.
In case you've just tuned in, there's breaking news that Donald Trump has no immunity from the January 6th prosecution. And so, as Jeffrey Toobin said earlier, it's obviously going to be appealed. This is an appellate court. It will be appealed. We'll see if the Supreme Court will take it. We'll talk more about that in a moment. My next question, Jeffrey, is whether or not this decision, this case, the arguments in this case, tell us anything more about where we, in fact, do draw the line over what former presidents can be prosecuted for.
That's a good question, Tavis. I don't really think it tells you that much, unlike the other case we're going to talk about, because all this case says is that presidents can be prosecuted for crimes, but it doesn't really say much about which crimes or what or exactly what the case might be. I mean, Trump's claim in this case was so incredibly broad, so counter to our ideas of equality under the law, that all the court really had to do in this case was say, look, if you commit a crime when you're president, you can be prosecuted. That's an idea that, frankly, everyone that I'm aware of had already taken for granted. You know, when Trump was impeached twice while he was president, one of the issues that frequently came up is, could a sitting president be indicted? And the Justice Department has a policy. It's not a law. It's a policy that the Justice Department says, we do not indict sitting presidents. We wait until they leave office. But the implicit, what that idea meant was that, of course, they could be prosecuted afterwards. And that's all the Justice Department, that's all the court decided today is, yes, they can be prosecuted after they leave office.
This is getting really fascinating for me. So let me keep down this line of questioning if I can. I'm going to play an attorney on the radio if I can for just a moment, Jeffrey Toobin, and stay with this line of questioning. So we all know, to your point, that the DOJ has, and I love how you frame this, and it's right on point. It is a policy. It is not a law. The Department of Justice has a policy that we do not prosecute sitting presidents. If Donald Trump is reelected, you know where I'm going already, don't you? If he's reelected,
sure, yeah.
He's already made so many public pronouncements about what he intends to do as president, including weaponizing the Department of Justice against what would then be former President Joe Biden if Donald Trump can pull this off. My point is this. If Donald Trump is elected, I can tell you 10 things right now he's already said that would be crimes. That would be certainly in the criminal basket. So if the Department of Justice's policy heretofore is that we don't prosecute sitting presidents, and Donald Trump gets in and does just half of the stuff that we think he might do, how is that policy going to hold up in a future Trump presidency? Does that make sense?
It makes sense as a question. And I think it has a very straightforward answer. Remember, the President of the United States is the head of the Justice Department. He appoints the Attorney General. He can simply say, I direct you, Attorney General, and all of your subordinates, don't prosecute me. In addition, and I have every reason to believe that's exactly what he'll say. But even more dramatic, Tavis, is if Trump is elected in November, becomes president next January, it's very likely that the two federal cases against him, the one in Florida about classified information, misuse of classified information, and the January 6th case in Washington, they may still be pending. He can simply say to his Attorney General, and he has more or less said this is what he's going to do, dismiss these cases. These are bad cases. I don't think they should be prosecuted. And as president, as the person in charge of the Justice Department, he can do that. So when Donald Trump is running to give himself a get-out-of-jail-free card, I mean, I think that's what really people need to focus on, is that if he wins, he can make sure he is not prosecuted for anything he did before or after he was president of the United States.
Okay, something, I'm not naive, but I'm going to stay with this. I'm not naive in asking this or commenting in this way, but something about that frame, Jeffrey Toobin, sounds anti-democratic and un-American to me. Here's my point. What you're telling me is, you legal scholar, that if Donald Trump were to be elected, he could do pretty much anything and then instruct the Department of Justice to not prosecute him, and the American people have no recourse. That sounds like a dictatorship, not a democracy.
Tavis, that is exactly what I am saying, and that is why it is a perilous situation to have him in charge of the Justice Department. I mean, he has said, for example, I will be a dictator for a day, but then I'll follow the laws. I mean, as usual with Trump, it's hard to tell how much he's joking and how much he's serious. But, we have never encountered a situation anything like this. The closest we have done is, you're a young man, Tavis, so you don't remember this, but in 1974, Richard Nixon resigned. Gerald Ford took over as president. He then issued a presidential pardon to Richard Nixon, saying he could not be prosecuted for anything he did as president. However, that pardon presupposed that the Justice Department had the right to prosecute a former president for things that he did. It presupposed there was no immunity. So what Trump argued to the Court of Appeals in this case was a kind of immunity that most people thought it wasn't even conceivable that any president had.
Mm. I'm going to push toward Thursday. I promise. I'm glad I got you for the full hour. We'll get to Thursday in a moment here. Let me just back up for a second, though, before we get to Thursday and maybe talk a bit more about today, Tuesday, and this breaking news in case you've just tuned in, that Donald Trump has no immunity. A federal appeals court has ruled that he has no immunity from prosecution for the January 6th insurrection and his role in that. We're talking with Jeffrey Toobin, a brilliant legal scholar. We'll get in a moment to Thursday when the Supreme Court will hear arguments on whether or not he can be kicked off of these state ballots. As you know, there are a number of states that have made different decisions about whether he should or should not be on the ballot. The Supreme Court hearing oral arguments about that on Thursday. So the Supreme Court is in play on a variety of levels, and that's where I want to go now, Jeffrey. I want to back up for a second and ask a kind of broad philosophical question. There's some reporter for Politico whose name escapes me at the moment who's writing a book about Bush v. Gore. And I sat with him for a while a few weeks ago and gave him my perspective specifically about the recount and Florida and the mistake that I think Al Gore made not fighting to recount votes in certain places, including Broward County, of course, where there were a number of African-American votes that I think might have made the difference. You will recall, you wrote the book, Al Gore told Jesse Jackson to stay out of Florida. He did not want race or anybody black connected to that particular moment. Contrast that with Joe Biden, who's wrapping himself in black folk. That's the point essentially I've made this reporter. We can discuss that later on. But the point is, I want to go back to Bush v. Gore because you wrote, again, the seminal book about Bush v. Gore called Too Close to Call. And my broad question is, talk to me about the role that the Supreme Court plays in these kinds of matters. I mean, these are matters of democracy. These are matters that concern who might be on the ballot and who will be president. And as I said at the top of this conversation, this moment right now is shaping up to be, baby Bush v. Gore or Bush v. Gore 2, as I see it. But I'll shut up. Just talk to me broadly about the role the Supreme Court plays in matters of this importance.
Well, this goes back really to the 18th century, where Chief Justice John Marshall, in a case called Marbury versus Madison, basically said the Supreme Court is the last word in American political life and legal life. Is that somebody has to make these final judgments, and we have evolved as a system where we expect that the Supreme Court has the last word. Now, that doesn't mean that we all agree with it, but these critical issues, like Bush v. Gore, and whether a president can be indicted, and whether a president can be on the ballot, they wind up in the Supreme Court, and that is why, among so many other reasons, why the Supreme Court is so important. And, I have made a career of agreeing and often disagreeing with the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. But one thing I've always known is they have the last word on these issues. Mm-hmm. And that will be true in these election cases in 2024, just as it was in the election of 2020.
One could argue that the court back then, Bush v. Gore, was politicized in its maneuverings, in its ultimate decision. One could argue that. Many have, as you well know. But there's no question about the fact that this court that will hear these Trump matters is more politicized than any court, certainly in my lifetime, maybe ever. Your thoughts about that a court that is clearly politicized is now getting involved in making what is a political decision?
Well, I am a believer that the Supreme Court has always been politicized to one degree or another. You know, these justices do not live in some sealed off vacuum apart from politics. But, you know, let's start with the fact that 3 of the 9 justices were appointed to the Supreme Court by Donald Trump. So, you know, they owe their seats to him. This is also a court that is far more conservative than it has ever been, certainly in our lifetime. I mean, this is the court that ended affirmative action, declared any sort of racial preferences illegal a year ago. This is the court that said that women's right to abortion can be taken away by state legislatures, and it now has been taken away by about a third of the state legislatures. These are very dramatic steps and very different from previous Supreme Courts, but that is how the court has evolved. This is why it was so important that Donald Trump got those 3 appointments to the court, because it really did change the political balance on the court. But this is the court we have, and there is no appeal after the Supreme Court.
You mentioned affirmative action, and before I lose you at the top of the hour, I'm glad I got another half hour in front of me, but before I lose you, I want to ask you about affirmative action, specifically this decision the other day by this same Supreme Court that refused to block use of race in West Point admissions. Now, we know they've wiped out affirmative action in higher education, but they refuse to block the use of race in West Point admissions. You know what that means, don't you? That you can pick a Negro to go to be in the military and fight for the country and die. You can use race for that, but you can't use race in admissions. We'll talk about that with Jeffrey Toobin before I lose him at the top of the hour. Jeffrey, in the 60 seconds I have now, and we'll talk about Thursday when we come forward, but with regard to Tuesday, today, and the decision, the breaking news decision that he does not have immunity from the January 6th prosecution, what would be your gut about whether or not the Supreme Court will take this case? And if they do, what's your gut about how they will rule on that part before we get to Thursday?
I think they will take the case.
Okay.
I think it is too important, and boy, it's a tough one. I mean, I you know, what I think the court should do and what the court does are often two very different things. I think Trump's claim is so wildly different from all of the traditions that we have come to understand in American law. I actually think there will be at least 5 votes to say the president does not have immunity, and the January 6th case can proceed. But that also may take a number of months that may make it almost impossible to have this trial before the election. That's the timing issue is separate from the merits.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the things you learn as a lawyer is that the procedure and timing is often as important as the substance, and that could be very well true here.
Yeah, and if you're a conservative member of the court and you really don't want to rule on this in the moment and get yourself in trouble with the American public, you just kick it down the road until after he gets reelected, were that to happen. I digress for now. Our guest is Jeffrey Toobin. There's breaking news about Donald Trump not having immunity from this breaking news out of this federal appellate court today, but we ain't got to Thursday yet when they're going to hear arguments about whether or not he can be kicked off of certain state ballots. Our guest, again, is Jeffrey Toobin, and I'm glad about it. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A Maui Police Department report about the wildfires that broke out on the island in Hawaii in August found that emergency dispatch was overwhelmed by call volume. The fires that destroyed the historic Lahaina district of the island were responsible for the deaths of 100 people and the burning of over 6,600 acres. It went on to also find that officers needed the training and tools to respond. In Tennessee, one of the men charged in Memphis African-American rapper Young Dolph's death wants a jury from outside of Shelby County. Justin Johnson's attorney made the request, saying that extensive media coverage could make for an unfair trial. He also says threats have been made against Johnson. In addition, he wants the trial moved to a different county. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Did you know Discover wants everyone to feel special? That's why with your Discover card, you have access to 24/7 customer service, as well as $0 fraud liability, which means you're never held responsible for unauthorized purchases. Learn more at discover.com/credit card. Limitations apply.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Both of LA's NBA teams ended long road trips with impressive wins last night. The Lakers got a strong triple-double from Anthony Davis to help finish a 4-2 trip. AD had 26 points, 15 rebounds, and 11 assists. LeBron also had 26 points and 7 assists. D'Angelo Russell led the Lakers with 28. The Lakers are home Thursday night against Denver. There's a ton of sparkling numbers for the Clippers. They held on for a 5-point win in Atlanta to cap a 6-1 Eastern road trip. 36 points for Kawhi Leonard, 30 points and 10 assists for James Harden. The Clippers shot 60% from three-point range. They are 19 games over 500 and just a half game behind Minnesota and Oklahoma City for the best record in the Western Conference. Since December 1st, the Clippers are 26-5. They're at home Wednesday night against New Orleans. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We're not just a thermometer recording and broadcasting popular opinion. We aim to be a thermostat, transforming the conversation about climate justice in our community. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
Looking for a career you'll love with flexibility, great pay, and benefits, and one of the country's top workplaces? Join the growing team at Progressive Insurance. Go to progressive.com/careers and apply online today.
The thing no one tells you about periods is that your flow changes every day, and so should your tampon size. Tampax has 5 absorbencies to match your changing flow. If it hurts to remove, go down a size. If it leaks, go up a size. Only Tampax has a leak guard braid to help give you up to 100% leak and odor-free protection. All-day comfort and protection for under $5 a month. Based on average U.S. consumer usage at manufacturer suggested price. However, pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. Excludes 8-count packs.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. 120,000 miles of night drives, daily commutes, and who knows how many.
Are we there yet?
Through countless fixes, elbow grease, and a new radiator, you kept your ride alive. With eBay Motors, you have over 122 million parts to keep it running. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, they'll be the perfect fit every time. Plus, at these prices, well, we're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Who do you trust to get at the truth? Tavis Smiley. That's who. The conversation continues right now.
Sometimes you have the luck of the draw, and I had the luck of the draw today because who knew that the appellate court would make a major decision today on the day that I just happened to have Jeffrey Toobin booked in this first hour. So I'm feeling very, very fortunate, very, very blessed in this hour to have one of the nation's preeminent legal scholars. He wrote the seminal book, about Bush v. Gore, Too Close to Call. Of course, he has a litany of New York Times bestsellers. You know Jeffrey Toobin, and you've all been subject to his brilliance when it comes to these legal matters. So I'm just lucky to have him as our guest in this hour, because the news broke a little bit ago, in case you've just tuned in, that the Federal Appeals Court has announced their decision regarding Donald Trump and this issue of immunity. So we now know that he does not, according to the appellate court, does not have immunity from January 6th prosecution. You heard Jeffrey Toobin say earlier that he expects that the Supreme Court will take this. Clearly, the Trump people are going to appeal. Jeffrey Toobin expects that the Supreme Court will take it. And he went out on a limb and says he believes there may be a fifth vote. There may be 5 votes to uphold this decision, that he does not, in fact, have immunity from January 6th prosecution. One final question about that, Jeffrey. Why are you, I won't say confident, but why are you leaning in the direction that there'll be 5 votes to uphold this decision?
Tavis, I'm gonna answer you by saying simply, because it's the right decision. I mean, we still live in a country where no one is supposed to be above the law. We don't create categories of people who can't be prosecuted no matter what they do. I mean, the idea is so offensive that most people hadn't had the gall even to raise it until recently.
But you do realize, Jeffrey, not to cut you off, as you're speaking, you do realize, I want you to hear yourself talking, you do realize there are a number of decisions they've made of late, this court, in the last couple of terms, that people find just as offensive. How could they do this? We already discussed it is a very politicized court. So I hope you're right. I want you to be right, but I would not be surprised given how politicized this court is. You made the point. 3 of the justices were appointed by Donald Trump. So your argument is it's just the right thing to do. Well, there are a number of other cases on which it was the right thing to do, and they didn't do the right thing.
And that's why I hesitated before answering. But at some point, some cases are easier than others.
Yeah.
And this case strikes me as very easy.
Okay.
I mean, this is something that has just never been even argued before that I'm aware of, that presidents have this kind of immunity. So unlike some of those other decisions we've talked about, which had been subject of continuing legal controversy for many years, this was not one that was the subject of controversy. This one was sort of taken for granted. But, I grant you, Tavis, that I may be wrong, and the court will surprise me here. But this is not a close call, this case, I think, even for conservatives on the court.
Fair enough.
But we shall see.
We shall see. That's the breaking news today, Tuesday. I want to push to Thursday, the Supreme Court hearing arguments about whether or not Trump can be kicked off these state ballots. Before I push to Thursday and go forward, let me go back for just a second, because Jeffrey Toobin mentioned affirmative action, and I'm so glad he did it. My ears just perked up because I've been dying to ask Jeffrey Toobin about this. Many of you saw days ago the Supreme Court refused to block the use of race in West Point admissions. And my simple read of that is, after having wiped out affirmative action in college admissions, they refuse to deny the use of race in West Point admissions. And so again, it seems to me, and this ain't a new story for black folk in this country. It just seems to me that when it comes to using race to pick folk to be in the military, to put their lives on the line, to serve their country, at worst to die for their country. I raise this against the backdrop of those 3 black soldiers that we all sadly saw die days ago. They won't block race in admissions for military academies, but you can't use it for college admissions. That's my read, Jeffrey Toobin, and I ain't happy about it. How do you read this?
Well, let me tell you what the court has said about West Point in the past, because this came up historically. And they said, and this is Justice O'Connor's position when she upheld affirmative action at the University of Michigan, and she mentioned the military academies. And what she said was, and what was very interesting in that case, this is going back to 2003, is there was a brief filed by a bunch of very high-ranking military officials, including retired Colin Powell, General Schwarzkopf. And they said, look, West Point is about training leaders of the military. And we know that the enlisted the enlisted part of the Army is disproportionately minority. And we cannot have, it is against national security to have an all-white officer corps and an all-minority enlisted corps. So we need to be able to use race at West Point so that the officer corps is more integrated. That's the argument that Justice O'Connor believed in back in 2003. Now we have this court that is much more hostile to the idea of any consideration of race. And if I can just, be a lawyer here for a second,
sure.
This decision that you're referring to about West Point just from a couple of days ago, that's just an interim decision. That's not a final decision on this issue. They haven't heard this case yet. So they are, for the moment, leaving the policy intact, which is affirmative action at the military academies. But that is still being challenged, and they will probably decide that for all time, or as a final decision in the next few months.
Yeah, I hear the argument, and I read that, of course. I'll just say creative, but not convincing.
Which is often the case.
Yeah, creative, but I ain't convinced. I'll leave that there for now. It is an interim decision, but it just tees up for me something to come that I ain't going to be happy about. If you wipe out affirmative action in college admissions, you can't give a brother or sister access to a high-quality education using race as a factor, but you allow it for people to go in the military. I got a problem with that. And that's another conversation for another time, because I could just talk, ad infinitum, ad nauseum about the way the military now is just reaching out so aggressively to these young black and brown potential enlistees, and what that says. That's another conversation again for another time. I digress on that. All right, let me move now toward Thursday. We've talked about the breaking news of today that Trump does not have immunity from January 6th prosecution. So Jeffrey, as I asked earlier, tee this one up. What is the Supreme Court going to do? What will they hear on Thursday? And when we come forward, we'll talk about it in greater detail.
Well, this is really, a wild case because, I consider myself a pretty well-informed person about the Constitution. This involves a part of the Constitution that I had never even heard of until a few months ago. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that any person who had engaged in insurrection cannot serve in the federal government, in effect. And the key phrase is engaged in insurrection. This was put into the 14th Amendment right after the Civil War for the very specific purpose of disqualifying Confederate leaders from serving in high-ranking forces in the federal government. Because just because the North won the Civil War, it didn't mean that all those Confederates went away. And so the Congress, the Reconstruction Congress, wanted to put a provision in that said if you were engaged in insurrection, you can't serve in the federal government anymore. There has been almost no use of this part of the Constitution in the subsequent 175 years. However, a group of law professors actually sort of excavated this, and they said, look, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. He initiated, supported overturning the 2020 election, and under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment should be disqualified. Now, the way our presidential elections work is that each state decides who's eligible on their ballot.
Right.
Colorado and Maine have decided, in light of this provision, that indeed Donald Trump cannot be on the ballot for president in their states. And the Colorado decision is the one being argued on appeal on Thursday.
So when we come forward, I want to ask Jeffrey Toobin, speaking of Thursday, what kinds of oral arguments he expects to hear on Thursday, and what kinds of questions does he expect the justices to ask on Thursday. You're listening to Jeffrey Toobin right now on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks, and Pat Prescott, and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. At this year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black.
Psst. Hey, I have a secret. I use Secret Whole Body Deodorant because more than just my armpits stink.
Oh, can I use it where my bra rubs under my...
Oh, yeah.
And what about down there? You know, my...
Totally. 4 out of 5 gynecologists would recommend it. So I tried it, and now I get 72 hours of freshness from my pits to my...
Ooh, I love that it's a spray.
Me too. And it comes in sticks and creams too. Go get your Secret Whole Body Deodorant.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
You pretty much already teed this up for me, Jeffrey Toobin. What do we expect on Thursday in terms of oral arguments, and what kinds of questions do you expect the justices to throw back at these lawyers?
Well, this is much more of a wild card, Tavis, because there is so little law on what this provision of the Constitution means. I expect there will be a lot of questioning on the word insurrection, because obviously when the 14th Amendment was enacted shortly after the Civil War, it was very clearly a reference to the Civil War and the South, and the idea that if you were part of that insurrection, you couldn't serve in the federal government. The question of whether what happened on January 6th and the period leading up to it was an insurrection, and how you define that insurrection, I expect that will come up. Also, I think we'll see questioning about the procedure that Colorado used to invoke the 14th Amendment. Did they give Donald Trump enough of an opportunity to contest? This also comes up. It was a court case in Colorado, in Maine, which also threw Trump off the ballot. The Secretary of State decided on her own that Trump couldn't serve. So the procedures for invoking the 14th Amendment, I expect that'll be part of oral argument. But, I mean, it's very rare that the Supreme Court has the opportunity to engage on a subject that they've never talked about or, frankly, thought about before. But this is that much of an obscure part of the Constitution that I am sure most of these justices have never thought about it, and they certainly haven't applied it because there's no case law.
When we come forward in our remaining moments with Jeffrey Toobin, we'll ask the penultimate question here, which is how he expects the court to find his side on this case. He offered his opinion earlier on what they will likely say or may say about whether or not Donald Trump has immunity when they hear the case that he's going to appeal. The decision that came down today that he does not have immunity from January 6th prosecution. But I'm curious in our remaining moments with Jeffrey Toobin to hear his thoughts on how the Supreme Court will rule on this. Will they allow Donald Trump to be kicked off of ballots in certain states? And if so, what does that mean? It's going to be a hot mess. It already is a hot mess between now and November. Jeffrey Toobin's response to that final question when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom. If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 believes in community empowerment. LA's 99 neighborhood councils form the grassroots level of the Los Angeles city government. The system was created to connect LA's diverse communities to City Hall. While neighborhood council board members are volunteers, they are also public officials elected to office by the members of their community. Neighborhood councils advocate on issues like homelessness, housing, land use, emergency preparedness, public safety, parks, transportation, and sustainability. They also provide local expertise on the delivery of city services to their various communities. Neighborhood councils are open to participation by anyone who is a part of the fabric of daily life in said community. This includes those who live, work, or own property or a business. If you are interested in stepping up to join your local neighborhood council, visit www.empowerla.org. That's empowerla.org. It's time to think globally, but act locally. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Watch out! You got me!
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Some people just know the best places to eat around town. Those are the people who know to choose Allstate. They know exactly where to go to get exactly what you're wanting. They know where to find the spiciest hot pot, the gooeyest brownies, and the tenderest, most flavorful portobello steak. Those people also know that safe drivers save 40% with Allstate.
Saving 40% is based on the national average premium savings for Allstate auto customers with a clean driving record versus those without. Savings vary by state and vary based on how you buy, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
Jeffrey Toobin, I had Douglas Brinkley on, presidential historian, on the other day, and I was just thinking about him, that Douglas and Michael Beschloss and Doris Kearns Goodwin and all these other presidential historians are going to have their hands full just trying to write about the moment that is. It'd be fascinating a few years from now to see how history regards this particular moment. That said, speaking of this moment, what do you expect after Thursday the Supreme Court will do after they hear these oral arguments about whether or not he ought to be kicked off ballots in certain states?
Well, this is such a blank canvas for the court, because there's been so little here. I think unlike the immunity case where I do think Trump will lose, I think they will figure out a way to say Trump has to appear on the ballots in 2024. Yeah. I think they will feel that there is something anti-democratic about taking that choice away from the voters. This case is closer than I thought it would be until I started looking into it.
Right.
I mean, the text of the 14th Amendment sure looks like he should be thrown off the ballot, but I somehow think they will figure out a way, or at least the 6 conservatives on the court will figure out a way to say you have to give the voters that choice.
Clearly, I'm no lawyer, but I do believe in due process and fundamental fairness and presumption of innocence. And it seems to me, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that unless and until you are found guilty of aiding and abetting or being involved in insurrection, what about due process? What about presumption of innocence? What about those bedrocks of our democracy? How could they, even if they wanted to, deny him being on the ballots?
Well, but remember the words of the Constitution. It doesn't say anyone who has been convicted of insurrection. It says anyone who was engaged in insurrection. Okay. So they could have said convicted, and then this case would be easy. Mm-hmm. But engaged makes it harder. And I think there are some escape routes for the court to say, well, Colorado didn't follow the appropriate procedures. Mm-hmm. That it is that may be the way they get out of this. But it turns out this case is closer than I thought, because my instinctual reaction was a lot like yours, was, come on, let's let the voters decide.
Sure.
But, the Constitution says the voters can't make certain choices. It may be that there is some 34-year-old out there who really should be president of the United States, and everybody wants to vote for her. But the Constitution says you have to be 35. Too bad. And that's the same argument. Yeah. That if you engage in insurrection, too bad.
I got 60 seconds left in this conversation. I want to make you political just for a quick second here. I apologize in advance, but I want to hear your take on it. And the question is whether or not you think strategically, as I do, that it's bad for the Democrats to play their cards this way. Beat him at the polls. But I think that trying to keep him off of ballots is going to rebound in ways we don't even want to deal with.
I understand that point of view, but, one of the things the Democrats do, I think, a little bit too much is argue with themselves and talk themselves out of fighting.
Fair enough.
If you have the opportunity, and if the Constitution says what it does say, maybe you should just fight like hell and not worry about, someone will think I'm too mean.
Yeah. I'm laughing because they would.
Exactly.
They certainly would.
Exactly. That's the point.
And they had, which is why Merrick Garland is Attorney General and not a member of the U.S. Supreme Court. Exactly, but I digress on that point. Jeffrey Toobin, I appreciate you always. Your insights are amazing to me. Your brilliance is astounding, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, my friend. All the best to you.
Thank you, my friend. Bye-bye.
Take care. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network, which was overwhelmed by call volume. The fires that destroyed the historic